Vandall was one of this country's most prolific and popular composers of educational piano music. He and his wife, Karen, also operated a thriving independent piano studio in Ohio for 38 years. When my students and I learned of his passing this past spring, we decided to dedicate our summer piano camp to him as a small token of our appreciation for making our lives as musicians so much more rewarding. When I first started teaching in 1982, there was not a lot of very exciting and satisfying teaching repertoire available for elementary and intermediate levels. If the music was not predictable, it might be awkward either pianistically or musically. Of course, we had the great classics of Bach, Chopin, and Brahms, but we were limited to a handful of composers like William Gillick or John George for interesting and accessible teaching material at earlier levels. That's why I was so excited to discover the music of Robert Vandall. He has made my life as a teacher over the past 35 years so wonderful and given my students such a great feeling of satisfaction and encouragement. I will never be able to thank him enough for providing such incredible music that students love and that affords success. My first student who ever won a state competition played one of Vandall's bagatelles, and I think that was probably the piece that helped her win. And so many students have played Vandall's pieces in my recitals over the past 35 years. Mr. Vandall was born in Ohio in 1944, the year before World War II ended. He grew up in a musical family. His father could play the piano and was a wonderful tenor soloist. His mother sang all the time. He said his grandfather was an evangelistic singer and that he heard him sing solos, duets with his dad, and trios with his dad and mother. His grandmother was their pianist. Mr. Vandall said that he always had to play something for her when he visited at their house. And his aunt was the best at playing the old Southern gospel songs. His dad was a member of the Columbia Record Club, and Mr. Vandall heard all of the great music composed by the classical masters at home. He started piano lessons at the age of 8 and progressed very steadily. He said he would play through every piece of music stacked on top of their old upright piano, from Hazel Scott's Boogie Woogie Left Hands to Handel's Messiah. Mr. Vandall was very inspired by his choral director growing up and said, quote, "I would not be in music if it were not for his training." I sang in church choirs, the high school choir, a select vocal octet, a barbershop quartet, a gospel quartet with my parents and brother, and accompanied the choir and the all-city chorus. After Mr. Vandall taught in several community colleges, he and his wife Karen moved to New Philadelphia, Ohio in 1977 so that their 2 young sons could grow up around their families. His wife had grown up on a dairy farm outside of this town, and Mr. Vandall was a city boy from Akron, Ohio. They had 2 sons, Chris, who became a professional percussionist and music teacher, and Bruce, who became a landscape designer. They also ended up having 5 grandchildren. In New Philadelphia, he and his wife established a thriving piano studio. He explained that they did not teach in their home, which was in a rural area about 6 miles outside of New Philadelphia. Instead, they bought a 2-story frame house, and for 20 years they used it as a studio. They taught Mondays through Thursdays, but Fridays were reserved for his composition and sometimes for his travel to present workshops and attend music teachers' conferences. Vandall wrote and arranged many piano education materials and presented in many piano teacher association groups. In nearly 20 states, they commissioned solos and duets from him for their students. In my opinion, as a piano teacher, the success of his compositions must largely be due to his skills as a teacher. He understood the students' hands, the strengths and challenges of different ages and levels, and he had a grasp of a healthy and coordinate technique. In a 2007 interview for Keyboard Companion, Mr. Vandall said that, quote, "The piece must have a strong emotional impact on the player and the listeners. Thin textures are not very gratifying for the student who wants to make wonderful sounds." Mary Elizabeth Clark called this, quote, "easy sounds hard," end of quote. Here's an interview that he gave a few years ago.
Robert Vandall is the composer of piano music, and he's known internationally for writing particularly interesting, fun, challenging works. Bob, it's great to be able to talk with you about this music.
Similar.
You're okay.
Yes.
Fascinated. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
Even grumpy uncles sit in recitals and would like these pieces. As I was hearing it, I was thinking, this is stuff that kids would like to play. Do you find it as well? Children like to play your pieces?
I hear from a lot of teachers around the country, and many of them say that their students only want to play my pieces, and that they have to purposely steer them other places so that the teacher herself feels they're providing a wider background of music.
Now, you started playing piano yourself at what age?
I was about 8 years old, 3rd grade.
Do you remember piano pieces that you played when you were 8 years old?
I played out of the Shawn method, so I remember some of those. As I got farther along, I played Malagueña,
oh yes,
the Prelude in C-sharp minor by Rachmaninoff,
oh sure,
Clair de Lune,
yeah,
Liebestrom, those chestnuts of the repertoire.
of course, but they're a little more advanced than
but some of the easier pieces, not too interesting.
Yeah, right.
It was method material.
Have you thought about that as you've been writing have you thought about that early experience and what made them not so interesting and tried to be interesting?
Well, I was teaching here in New Philly during the 1st or 2nd year I was here. I got the idea from watching my own students play what I thought was boring music. And I told my dad at the kitchen table one day during the winter of '78 that I am going to try this. I'm going to see what comes of it.
How much composing had you done prior to that?
I had arranged 9 ensembles for a piano lab situation.
Oh, okay.
That was it.
Yeah.
Besides the student things that we all do when we're studying theory in college, but not until then.
Yeah, the But so you send, now what you do, you write up these pieces, you write them out in pencil or in ink or something like this, and then you send them off to publishers back then.
Yes.
And I suppose it's probably the same now as well, that to
Yeah,
publishers.
and I have folders full of manuscripts that I've sent off through the mail over a period of years.
Right, right.
I got rejections.
Yeah.
What I do when I get a rejection, I throw that piece away. I don't keep it
Really?
because I don't want, on the event of my death, I don't want somebody coming back, rummaging through the files and pulling out inferior things and publishing it.
You don't just send them off to, you don't send the rejected piece off to another, you wouldn't
No.
have sent them off to
when
another
I
publisher?
when I decided who my publisher was, I
Oh.
did not go elsewhere.
I see.
So if Mary Elizabeth Clark at McLelland Music Press did not like something, and then I threw it away.
And then McLelland Press got bought by Alfred.
Yes.
And Alfred is a big publishing company.
Yes.
It's a well-known name in the business. Michaelis, not so much.
No.
Alfred yeah, their catalogs come to me all the time and things. So how long have you been with them?
Since 2004.
Yeah.
So 9 years.
And that's been a good relationship.
Very good. They encouraged me to work differently. I used to write when I wanted to, what I wanted to. And that was fine with Michaelis.
Yeah.
With Alfred, they put me on a schedule. We need 3 solos in 4 months. We need this book by September. We need this by January.
It could be an interesting question. How do they know what they want from you and on what kind of timetable?
Well, the editor has a whole group of composers he's working with. And he literally plans 2 years in advance.
I see.
And so he plans all of this out, and he lets me know, he lets them know, and so we all send it to a central location where the editors make the decisions. I've never disagreed with what they wanted me to do. I'm just happy to be doing it.
What about when you have something in mind that they don't want? You don't have time to pursue that, or
I've
what?
been so busy, I haven't had time to think about anything like that.
Yeah.
I see it as being somewhat egotistical for me to say, hey, I want to write this. As I say, I'm very happy to live in the way that they want me to work.
Right. Yeah. And I imagine you don't find them uninteresting. The ideas they have
No,
are
I like what they.
fun. Sure.
One of the first things they asked me to do was to write what they call recital suites, and they do them in geographical areas of the country, certain states of the Union. So since I lived in Ohio, they said, why don't you write an Ohio suite? Well, I loved that assignment.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the pieces I wrote is called Rockin' at the Hall, in which I was trying to write a pseudo Jerry Lee Lewis piece in honor of the Rock Hall of Fame
How about that?
in Cleveland, and it's one of my most popular
Well,
pieces.
sure, because they can market that regionally and are assured some pretty good sales.
And people all over the country play it.
Well, that piece
I
too,
hear-
because it's
yeah,
rock. Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah.
The kids like playing the rock and roll thing.
Sure, right.
Yeah.
And we all grew up with it. So
Sure.
The business about titles. How do you come up with titles for your pieces?
I come up with titles very difficultly,
What-
it's hard for me.
Why? And it needs a title because that's what sort of sells the piece to the kid, as it were, right?
Well, and the title has to reflect the character of the piece,
Right.
provide an image.
Yeah.
When my boys were both at home, they helped me with titles. I wrote a little piece called Pianist on the Prowl, which is fairly popular. That title came from my son Chris, who played a percussion piece called Percussionist on the Prowl. And sometimes I used to just leave pieces at home because I didn't have a title.
Interesting.
So I would send the piece off without a title. And Mrs. Clark from Michaelis wrote back, don't send the untitled pieces anymore. Just keep them till you have a title. So I have a thesaurus at home. I go through and look through words. I lay on the floor in the living room just trying to get inspiration. It's tough.
It's really part
It's
of the
hard
creative
for me.
process is not only putting the notes, thinking up the notes, putting them on paper, but also then coming up with some kind of words that are then going to somehow encapsulate them of mood, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes you can probably refer to something we would call kind of technical, like a device, a compositional device that gets used, like you mentioned a piece with an ostinato.
Oh, yeah, I wrote a piece, it's for duet, called Ostinato Barbaro. So I have this driving bass line and lots of percussive rhythms going. And the word Barbaro comes from a piece by Bartók.
Right.
He used that title in one of his pieces.
You don't seem like a Barbaro kind of guy to me.
No, I'm not.
I'd like to hear that. What's the process of working? Do you use a computer, software, any of that stuff?
No, the very first thing I do is sit at the piano and just improvise. Sometimes I'll play for an hour and not write one note. I don't write anything down until I have a good first phrase.
Yeah.
And then, well, you know this. Once I have a good first phrase, then the second phrase springs from that. Then those two make a structure, and then what follows springs from that.
Right.
But I use pencil, and even when I do the final manuscript, I use a ruler and a pencil, because now I want my lines straight.
Oh yeah, sure. I do actually the first draft. If I start drawing lines crooked, then my ideas start falling all over the paper, and it's just messy. So yes, right. So it's not a matter of you walking down the street and a tune hits you over the head, and you've got to go write it down.
Well, Karen and I were out walking one morning, and a tune came to my brain. 3 notes up, go down, cross over, 3 notes up, go down, cross over, 3 notes up. And when we got back home, I tried it out, and it felt good at the keyboard and worked. And that piece became Lady Allison's Minuet. So occasionally, yes, things do come. Well, again, we were out walking, and I found of a little chromatic pattern. The fingers are real close together. And so I came up with a piece I call Crooked Run Rag. Karen and I were both extremely ill at the same time once, and I was laying in bed and a tune came to me, and I knew if I went to sleep, I would forget it. So I got up, wrote it out in pencil, slept that night, got up the next morning, and it became a duet called Fly with the Eagles.
Oh yes.
So anyway, those 3 instances, it did come to me away from the keyboard, but as a general rule, I've got to be at the piano.
And I noticed you're very tactile, even as you were relating that story, with just finger patterns.
Yes.
But of course, you're dealing, the music you're writing, you were writing for student learners at the keyboard, and so how the fingers are moving, what the patterns are of the fingers is, of course, is a very important part of the process, and in fact, is part of it's at the beginning and at the end of the process. So you're always thinking about finger positions and hand positions.
In fact, I purposely try to repeat a pattern a lot. The tricky part is, can you repeat it in such a way that it stays interesting?
Right.
So now not only is melody working for you, but you have harmony and rhythm. So among those 3 things, you can, at least I hope I can come up with something interesting, and yet with one pattern. That's what teachers have told me they like about my pieces.
Yeah.
They're so patterned that their students can learn them easily.
Right, yeah. And again, the final product is just, I'll use the word one more time, charming.
Thank you.
It's really delightful and interesting to listen to. I had a ball working on the orchestration for the concerto. You're working on a project now, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Do I know what it is?
Sure.
My next project is to write 35 to 40 solos, which will be divided up into 3 separate books. When that is done, then I have 2 books of duets to write based on hymns. Then I have a recital suite for the state of Colorado to do. That should take me to the end of the year.
The end of the year.
End of
April now.
Yes,
Okay.
well, the end of this calendar year, 2013. Then, when I finish some of those, I will then hear what's coming up next. I feel very fortunate that I get these assignments. I'm extremely happy about it. I'm very fortunate that they think what I write is of value.
So, Bob, thank you so
Hey,
much.
thank you. Thank you.
In 2009, I had the opportunity of meeting Mr. Vandall at a National Music Teachers Conference in Atlanta, Georgia. He was so gracious and kind and personable. He took so much time and made us feel as if we were long-lost friends. Several of my students were attending the conference, participating in a workshop, and he visited with them, signed their music, posed for photos, and gave them words of encouragement. In fact, 2 of these students went on to enjoy composing themselves. By Mr. Vandall's own confession, he loved ice cream, especially vanilla ice cream. So today at camp, we will be having his favorite treat for dessert this evening at the close of camp. He was an active member of the Methodist Church, and his hobbies reflected his love of the outdoors, as he and his wife both enjoyed gardening, walking, and hiking. They even loved to ballroom dance, so today we will also be learning the basic steps to the East Coast Swing, one of their favorite dances, and enjoying some outdoor hiking and boating. A little bit later, we'll be preparing some plays based upon different scenes from his life, which we read about through interviews in magazines and also on his Facebook page. This is but a small tribute of showing our gratitude to Mr. Vandall for making our lives a better place with his wonderful music and spirit.